Hello and welcome to the Game Theory Podcast. I am your host, Sam Vicini. We're powered by CLNS Radio. Today's sponsors, again, are SeatGeek and MyBookie, the two most important things you need to enjoy the NCAA tournament. You need seats to games, and you need a gambling book to place bets. Selection Sunday is come and gone. We have this big bracket to break down, obviously, 68 teams. To do that, I have brought on Mike Rutherford from over at SB Nation, as well as the host of Ramsey and Rutherford on 93.9 The Ville in Louisville to chat about some of the things you should know in your bracket. We're going to talk about Louisville a little bit, obviously, and we're going to talk a little bit about Cinderellas. So how's it going, Mike?
It's going well, Sam. I'm very honored to be here. I've enjoyed the Game Theory podcast for a long time, and I feel I'm starstruck because I used to listen to the old CBS podcast, and you were the only person I could actually hear. So it was basically if I was like mowing the yard or doing anything, it was like a lot of murmuring, and then your voice just coming in and talking about a topic that I had no idea had been introduced. So I'm starstruck to be here.
Yeah, I mean, I tried to actually speak into the microphone whenever I was on that podcast, and sometimes I wondered whether or not GP was doing the same thing. So I'll talk about, I think that Gary's coming on the podcast at some point this week. I'll be sure to talk to him about getting his levels correct for whenever he's on the pod. But I appreciate you coming on here. You obviously do a great job over in Louisville covering the Cardinals, and you do a great job covering national college basketball at SB Nation. So the first thing I wanted to ask you, though, is it has nothing to do with this year necessarily, unless you're going to come with something totally off the wall. But what is your favorite NCAA tournament memory?
Oh, man. I mean, as a fan, and I still get to be that, which is the best part about doing the Card Chronicle gig and the radio gig.
Yeah.
I mean, 2013, watching Louisville actually win a national title with my own eyes, being at the Georgia Dome, seeing the Nets come down, watching that whole thing, getting to go and hang out with the team or see the team at the team hotel afterward was just, I mean, it was the realization of something that I had spent far too many hours daydreaming about as a kid. It makes you think about watching all those games on the couch with your dad and going to old games when you were little. And, for a long time there, growing up as a Louisville fan in the 90s, you never knew if it was actually going to happen for you. You never knew if you were going to get those memories that everyone had in the 80s. And to see it happen was very, very cool. But aside from that, just like the standard kid tournament memory, I guess it was the Bryce Drew shot, which is it for so many people, Valpo over Ole Miss. And we had the coolest, back when they had, I don't know if they have computer classes anymore. I think every kid knows about computers. But we used to have computer class, and I was in 6th grade, and we had the coolest teacher. Shout out to Mrs. Clausing. She was fantastic. And I don't even know what we were doing, playing number munchers or something. And she rolled out the old TV, and we got to watch the game, and it was the early game on that Thursday. And, hitting that shot and celebrating with my friends. And, in Kentucky, all you ever do is watch basketball during the NCAA tournament during March. And so we were focused on the TV. It was a really cool, childhood tournament memory.
Yeah, I think that one is also, one of my first memories of the NCAA tournament. Just that shot and, the crazy little, dump off pass to Bryce Drew. The play is obviously called Pacer now, as everyone knows. That's become such a massive part of the NCAA tournament history. I think that's definitely one of my first ones. I mean, my best one is just last year. I mean, I was 20 feet from Chris Jenkins whenever he hit the shot, sitting courtside covering for CBS. I mean, I haven't had a chance to see Ohio State win. Carnegie Mellon's never going to win an NCAA tournament. Pitt has never really had a crazy amount of success getting to a Final Four or anything during my lifetime. So I don't really have that fan success that, you have gotten to experience and other people have gotten to experience, Kentucky fans, North Carolina fans, Duke fans. But I mean, being right there for that shot last year it was one of the most incredible things because people were still trying to recover from Marcus Page, scoring 8 points in the last 80 seconds of that game.
Yeah.
And then, hitting the flailing 3-point shot that I thought was going to go down in history as one of the most incredible, best shots in the NCAA tournament's lore. And then Chris Jenkins just comes down and makes everyone forget about it. That was a surreal experience, I think.
It's probably, you'll probably never top that either, which I obviously I hope that we all get a tournament memory as good as that. But to be there for that moment, I mean, it had never happened before. And a championship game buzzer beater is going to be pretty tough. And like you said, all the stuff that led up to it. Can I ask you, like, when you were growing up and the tournament was going on and you were like in grade school, did you guys get to, like, did you have the option of watching the games in class or during lunch? Was that a possibility?
Well, so I'm 26. So, like, I was coming up, like, kind of in the era where computers were starting to, like, get into schools and, you know, like, starting to get to the point where you'd be able to wheel out a computer and or you'd take like a computer class in 8th period and watch the games and try to sneak it while your teachers weren't looking. But like, I didn't really, like, growing up in Pittsburgh, like, basketball's not a thing in Pittsburgh. The Panthers, like, just got good whenever I was probably 12, 13 years old probably. So like, it wasn't really a thing, I guess, until maybe I was like 16, 17, and computers were just like all over the place. Like, we could watch, we could bring our computers to class and just like watch games and do what we wanted. But, now or like when I was growing up, it was nothing like that. It was nothing like the experience that I'm sure that you got in Kentucky where like you said, like a teacher would like roll a TV out. Like that was not my experience at all.
See, I had no idea that this wasn't the way the rest of the country treated the tournament until like I went away to like, you had the option of going to recess at lunch or staying in and watching the games, and we all stayed in and watched the games. And you didn't have class basically after lunch; you just watched the NCAA tournament. And then I went to college at Dayton, which is pretty basketball crazy itself, but you've got a lot of people up there from Chicago. And when I would talk to them about this, they were like, "What the hell are you talking about?" I'm like, "You guys didn't do that? What's wrong with you all? The tournament's what you do." And they had no idea that we treated it like such a big deal. And the older I've gotten, the more I've realized that, being here, we just cared about college basketball way, way more than like the vast majority of the country did. And I had no idea growing up that it wasn't just a natural thing that you got to watch the tournament games. And my friends would be like, "You mean when Louisville or Kentucky was playing, you guys got to stay in?" And we were like, "No, it didn't matter if it was, Cincinnati versus Tennessee Martin. Like we were watching the game on TV. That's just the way it worked here."
That's incredible. I mean, yeah, like it wasn't like you weren't able to sneak it during my time, but like it was definitely not a sanctioned activity to sit down and watch basketball during grade school. Let's talk about like the team that you cover most, Louisville. Obviously, Louisville gets a number 2 seed here. I think that a lot of people are kind of underestimating them. Have you kind of gotten that impression?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's sort of it's been a weird season. It's been a weird season for a really successful team, if that makes sense. Because, Louisville, I think they started off like right around number 15, but you had the fact that people had kind of forgotten about their recent success because of all the, the scandal and the fact that they sat out the postseason. And so it was just a weird start. And then they've just kind of hovered around that top 10 the entire season, and yet have never really been a primary player in anybody's national title conversation, which is just sort of bizarre. And then now you've got this kind of disjointed end of the season where, they were competitive with everybody, didn't really beat anybody really good, but didn't lose, in horrific fashion or anything like that. I mean, they don't have a loss to a non-NCAA tournament team, and they've got some really quality wins, but they just couldn't get over the hump in the last 3 weeks of the season. And that obviously culminated with the quarterfinal game in the ACC tournament against Duke, where they really should have won. I mean, they had that game won, and that's kind of been a storyline of their season. But to answer your question, yeah, I mean, I think that they are sort of being overlooked. It's almost like they're a forgotten 2 seed at this point.
Yeah, and I do think that at some level it's because they drew what might be the toughest route for a number 2. In my opinion, maybe outside of Kentucky. Kentucky also has a tough route, but Louisville's going to have to play either a scalding hot Michigan team or they're going to have to play the best offensive team in the country in Oklahoma State in the second round. And then after that, I mean, we'll see what happens, but Oregon's been a team for me that I think has been in the top 8 of the country the entire year and could have easily looked right on the 2 line. And then Rhode Island, everyone's excited about Rhode Island being super hot going into the NCAA tournament. They're probably better than an 11 seed typically. So, like, I'm not a huge fan of the draw that Louisville got. Do you kind of feel the same way?
It's weird. It's sort of the opposite down here. I mean, a lot of people I think maybe people got carried away with the fact that Louisville's a 2 seed, when everybody thought they were going to be a 3, and there were some people who thought they were going to be a 4. And I think that's sort of it's probably the wrong stance to take, because I think the only reason, and maybe I don't know if you agree with this, I think the only reason Louisville's a 2 is because Chris Boucher got hurt on Saturday. The committee found out about it, and instead of doing the scrub thing because it was so late in the game, they just flipped Louisville and Oregon. Like, that would be my guess as to how that played out. They probably had Oregon penciled in as a 2. Boucher got hurt, and then they lost to Arizona, and so they just went ahead and flipped the 2 teams that were in their same region. That's kind of what was my thinking there. But, the second-round game is what's popped out to everybody who's a Louisville fan. The fact that Michigan's playing so well, the fact that they seem to have all these kind of karmic forces on their side right now. I mean, it's a scary thing to be walking into, and I hate to take anything away from them, but you're like, man, I hope that there's not some higher force at play here, because they have that crazy plane incident, and then they go and they win the Big Ten tournament and kind of are playing carefree. And the thing that I think hasn't been talked about all that much, or at least as much as I thought it was going to be, remember Austin Hatch, the kid who had that remarkable story in high school where he was in 2 separate plane crashes that killed people in his family, and he was committed to Michigan after the last one. Never really, he's still sort of like remembering how to be a person at this point, trying to get all of his body functions back. They honor his scholarship anyway. He joins the team. I think now he's on the staff. He's not a player on scholarship, but he's a part of Michigan basketball. He wasn't on the plane, but you've got that angle thrown in, and then you've got John Beilein, who his 2 biggest losses, his 2 most crushing losses, both came to Louisville and Rick Pitino, the 05 Elite 8 when he was at West Virginia, and then the championship game in 2013. Like, all of that stuff kind of coming together, like, if you were a storyteller, you would have Michigan winning that game over Louisville. I know that's not a real thing, but it kind of feels real. And then, like you mentioned, Oklahoma State being such a high-scoring team, and Jawan Evans being one of the better guards that Louisville will have seen, and the fact that Louisville's not playing particularly great defense heading into the tournament, which is so uncharacteristic of them, I mean, that's also a scary outlook. But I think most Louisville fans are saying that second-round game is scary, but we sort of like the draw outside of that, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, the defense thing is a really interesting one for me, because for, I would say, 85% of the season, Louisville was one of the 2 or 3 best defensive teams in the country. But then you come down the stretch here, you give up over a point per possession to North Carolina, give up just a metric ton of points to Wake Forest, struggle a little bit against Duke, struggle a little bit against even Notre Dame, it seemed like, was scoring a little bit more often than you would like to see from Louisville. Like, what is the worry level right now in terms of, is this defense going to be able to get it back together in time for the NCAA tournament?
I love that Rick Pitino, when Louisville was number 1 or number 2 in Ken Pom for the first 2 months of the season, he kept saying, you guys just look at the stats. This is actually a really bad defensive team. It's a really bad defensive team. And everybody here sort of rolled their eyes and said, you say this every year, and every year they're number 1 in just like every defensive category. And then now, when they seem to be playing really poor defense and the numbers are catching up with them, Rick Pitino's like, I'm not worried about it. Like, we're going to be fine. We got to figure it out. We're going to do this. The issue, I mean, whatever you think is what Rick Pitino's going to tell you the opposite. We had him on the radio show, I guess it was the end of last week, and I got some great, that's none of your business, Mike, just real short responses. It was fantastic. I always really enjoy that. But I think the issue with this team, I mean, the reason why Louisville, I think, does better in the tournament, than a lot of the teams that are also up there perennially in the Ken Pom defensive ratings, they play different defenses. I mean, Virginia and teams like Wisconsin, like, they're really good because they have one system and they perfect it. Syracuse in the 2-3 zone, they know what they're doing. Louisville will change defenses 3 times in one possession, and that's why they're so difficult to prepare for, because you don't know what offense to run in the middle of a possession. Jeff Greer and I were talking about this, and he always brings the story up. But when Louisville was playing Clemson, there was a possession where, Louisville they were going from their shifting 2-3 to their matchup zone to their straight up man-to-man. And eventually, I can't remember who had the ball for Clemson, but he pulls it out, and there's like 12 seconds on the shot clock, and he looks at Brad Brownell, and it's kind of like, what do you want me to do? And Brad Brownell is just like, I don't know, do something. Like, just like shrugs his shoulders. He's like, I got nothing for you. And that was that's why Louisville's defense is so good. But they've got a lot of guys out there who they have not grasped the system for whatever reason, and they don't talk enough, And I think maybe the bigger thing, the more simple thing, they don't have the guards that are as laterally quick as the ones that they've had in the past, like Terry Rozier and Russ Smith and Peyton Siva. Louisville's guards get beat too quickly off the dribble, and that kind of destroys the whole philosophy.
Yeah, I mean, Quentin Snyder is obviously a problem there, but Donovan Mitchell for me has been terrific all year, especially on the defensive end. I mean, he's not only shooting 36% from three, and he's passing the ball really well, but he's finishing inside. Like he has made the leap from, project that I thought might be able to get into the first round at some point to like serious potential first round pick this year as a sophomore. I thought it would take maybe one more year for him to get to that level, but he's gotten there basically.
He's been tremendous. I mean, he's under a little bit of scrutiny here because of the way that he's played in big games on the road recently, including the game against Duke. Or I shouldn't say on the road, but big games away from the Yum Center.
Yeah.
And I think, Rick Pitino's also kind of he's criticized his defense a little bit too. I mean, he's a really good defender, but Pitino keeps talking about how this team doesn't get steals, and they don't generate enough cheap points off of turnovers. When they get turnovers, they're typically dead ball turnovers or steals around the basket. Inside on entry passes and stuff like that don't lead to points. And Donovan's kind of the only guy Louisville has who can get you that steal, fast break bucket that kind of changes the tone of the game. And as a result, he's gambled a little bit more in recent weeks.
Yeah.
And he's certainly more athletic and quicker than Quentin Snyder, but he's not a guy like Russ Smith who could constantly try to get that reach around steal and then recover. Like Donovan takes those chances and then it ends up being 4-on-5. And Louisville's not very good in those situations. So, I mean, he's been great overall. He's been tremendous. But sometimes I think he settles too much for the outside shot, and that man-to-man defense has to get shored up a little bit if Louisville's going to win, 4 or 6 games here in the next month.
Can we have a quick 30-second Russ Smith appreciation moment? Because
oh my God,
I love that dude.
3 hours.
Yeah, I love Russ Smith, unconditionally.
He is, I mean, you're supposed to, like, when you say your favorite player, everybody always asks that question. It's always supposed to be somebody from your childhood. Like, mine's Russ Smith, and he's younger than I am. And it kind of sounds pathetic, but he's the funniest, like, coolest, one of the smartest guys who's ever played for Louisville. And in a weird way, like, he sort of, like, softened Rick Pitino, and I think probably kept him at Louisville longer than he was going to be otherwise. The first time I ever met Rick, he was telling a story about in practice that day, they were doing this drill where it was just supposed to be installing an offense, and nobody was dribbling, nobody was shooting, they were just doing passing and listening to Pitino. And he said about halfway through it, Russ just got, he couldn't take it anymore, dribbled between his legs 3 times and took a 3-point shot. And Rick was like, "What the hell are you doing?" And Russ just looked at him and like started rolling over laughing. And then Rick was like, I mean, any other year I would have kicked him off the team probably. And he goes, "I couldn't help but just start laughing." And it was, yeah, I think really indicative of their relationship.
Yeah, no, Russ Smith is one of my favorite college basketball players of the last, decade. Like, just the way that he grew from being just a total train wreck, on the floor. Like, there were points his freshman and sophomore year where he was just undeniably hurting Louisville to being, one of the 5 best players in the country and being Russ Smith. There's no better story than that to me. Real quick before...
I've never been more wrong about a kid. Never been more wrong.
Real quick before we move on, what are the odds that Rick Pitino uses the idea here of win one for the strippers instead of win one for the Gipper?
Oh, man. It's not going to happen. I mean, he at this point, he won't even... he won't talk about last year. I mean, a few months ago even, he would answer questions about, as far as what we went through last year, it's making this season sweeter. And he would talk about Damian Lee and Trey Lewis. And now if you even bring up, somebody today asked him if he watched the selection show last year. I mean, he's like, I've repressed it. I don't think about it at all. I mean, it was just, hey, he's not going to talk about it, let alone make jokes about it. But it'd be pretty funny if he did.
Yeah, that'd be incredible. Let's move on to the rest of the bracket. What else caught your eye whenever this thing was released on Sunday?
I mean, I guess first, the fact that Vanderbilt wasn't just in the tournament, but that they were in so easily. To me, I mean, look, they're breaking history. They're setting a new record for most losses for an at-large team with 15. And they went. It's not like they were playing in God's gift to basketball as far as a conference is concerned. And they went 10-8 in the SEC. I get that they had the strongest schedule in the entire country. I get that they had some quality wins and they beat down Florida every time they played. But the fact that they were in so comfortably as a 9 seed to me sort of stood out. I mean, I would buy them going to Dayton and playing on Tuesday or Wednesday, but the fact that they got in so comfortably I thought was surprising. The other big thing, I mean, I'm not breaking any new ground here, but Wichita State being a 10 and that potential of the reverse 2014 game between Kentucky and Wichita in the second round where Wichita could kind of play the whole, like, now you know how it feels. Like, we shouldn't have had to have done this in the first weekend either 3 years ago, and now you're getting a taste of it. I think that would be, I mean, if that happens, and I think it could be a really good game, too. I really do. And I would love to see that go down.
That is, like, not even underrated. That is just, like, high-key the Petty Bowl. Because, good God, both John Calipari and Greg Marshall are the pettiest dudes whenever it comes to the NCAA tournament and comes to seeding.
Oh, his press conference, was it yesterday, I guess? Was it last night or this morning? Whenever it was
last
just,
night.
I mean, grade A, Greg Marshall. I mean, the fact, like, yeah, I'm just glad that they remembered us at all. Like, I mean, it was just standard Marshall. But you're right, Calipari constantly complaining about wherever Kentucky is and talking about blaming the SEC tournament, blaming everything. I mean, it's beautiful. And yeah, whoever loses that game, their post-game press conference is going to be, assuming Wichita makes it past Dayton, of course. Yeah. But whoever loses that game, their post-game press conference is just going to be, I mean, I'll probably turn off another game just to watch the post-game presser.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you on that. It's just going to be absolutely glorious. Like, in terms of the teams that are in the field, do you think the right teams were in the field? I said yesterday on the show that I think the committee got all 68 of 68 right. The seeding issues are a whole different ballgame, and they were dreadful and a disaster. But, like, in terms of the right teams in the field, do you think that they're in?
I mean, I'd rather see, and it's a personal preference at this point. It's kind of like, it's sort of like judging a most valuable player award. You know, it goes into like what you think is, or I guess a conference player of the year is a more apt title. It's like, what do you value the most? Do you value stats? Do you value the guy who meant the most to his team, or do you value overall team success? I mean, just so personally, I would have loved to have seen Illinois State in the field, and I get why you exclude them, but like the whole notion, and I know Jay Billis has said this a bunch the last couple of weeks, but the whole like tie goes to the runner, and in this case, let's let the runner be the little guy. I kind of agree with that. I'm not saying they would have beaten Wake Forest or whomever if they played in the first four, but I would have liked to have at least seen them get that chance, just because. And Dan Moeller, by the way, his Twitter stuff is just fantastic, and they've got a home and home now with Ole Miss based solely on his just like grouchy, salty tweet from this morning, which is kind of a phenomenal story. If somebody actually agrees to play them. But I'm kind of with you. I get why Vandy gets in. I get why K-State gets in. I get why the other first four get in. But I just would have liked to have seen Illinois State get a shot, even though it's sort of hard to defend when they've got no quality wins. If you're looking at that, I would have liked to have seen what they would have done in that situation, because I think it would have meant more to them than maybe, a middling power conference team.
Yeah, no, I mean, trust me, you're preaching to the choir on that. I wrote like a 3,000-word feature on UT Arlington hoping they would win the Sun Belt. And I was hoping that like they would even have a chance to like get an at-large, but it seems like they were never even considered, even though they beat St. Mary's, they beat Texas. Like they actually do have wins that they can fall back on other than winning the Sun Belt, which is a pretty strong league this year by 2 games. So like, I totally agree with you on this. Like, I would much rather see the little guy get a shot than see Kansas State or Providence get in the field and, likely play what will be, they'll be fun games, no doubt. Like, both of those play-in games are going to be really fun, up-tempo, offensive games, but it's a lot more fun to me to see the little guy get in. Last year, the surprise was Tulsa, and Tulsa's like not like necessarily your prototypical little guy, but it was still interesting to see them at least get into the field.
Do you think, because I've thought this for years, I've thought that the committee goes with like an attractive, they try to get an up-tempo team in the first four, just to sort of, because they know that the casual fans might be tuning in, and they know that the 16 seed games are going to be just totally bogus. And so I've always felt like when Iona got in and nobody thought they were going to get in, and they were the highest scoring team in the country, I thought it was just so they could have an exciting game. BYU's gotten in a couple times, and they always score a lot of points. And I kind of feel like they do that on purpose. Like, and like you said, Now you've got Providence and SC and Wake and all these teams that like to get up and down. And I feel like there's a trend in play now. And even last year with Wichita and Vandy, like they kind of were up-tempo teams, and you knew Wichita was going to score a lot. I feel like that happens every single year.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point because Wichita is going to at least draw a crowd because of Greg Marshall just being surly as hell and making a stink. Like that Wake Forest is going to draw a crowd because they have two NBA players and have a really fun style of basketball. USC, same thing. They're going to get up and down. They're going to play a fun style. The BYU thing is interesting too. And Iona, yeah, you're kind of right here. I think there is a trend going toward that. Like I wonder if unconsciously the committee kind of is thinking about this.
Because nobody had Iona in that year when they made it, and they blew that just gigantic lead. It was actually against BYU when they were up 23 in the second half or something, and it was a really exciting game that everybody was talking about the next day. And if you take like Clemson or somebody who's going to score in the 60s, nobody's going to care about that game anyway. It's just going to get totally overlooked. And little known fact, the first NCAA tournament game I ever went to, I actually attended the play-in game when it was actually the play-in game back in the Halcyon days when it was, everything was right and we walked to basketball games in the snow. And it was Oakland versus somebody I don't even remember. But Raul Marshall dunked from the free throw line, and it was fantastic. I actually went to an original play-in game, and I've got no idea why now. I was a dumb college kid.
Yeah, getting to see Raul Marshall dunk from the foul line, he led the nation in scoring one year, didn't he? He was pretty damn close if he didn't.
He was, and he got drafted in the second round. I always had an attachment to him after that game because I think Oakland had a losing record that year, and they lost the game, but his dunk was worth the price of admission. I guess it was 05. I think I went with some friends, and it was that date, and there was nothing else to do. And it was a tournament game, so why not? But that was my first NCAA tournament game. Actually, it was a play-in game at Dayton.
Well, shout out to Raul Marshall. Did not expect that name to be dropped. Did not expect that name to be dropped on the podcast. Let's talk about some Cinderellas. What teams stand out to you in terms of potentially being able to cause a ruckus here? I think everyone's talking about Middle Tennessee State, but is there anyone else that you're looking at that could really make some noise?
I feel so sorry Richard Pitino's done such a great job, and everybody's taking that as their upset, and it's going to happen.
Vegas has it as a pick 'em
I hate
right
to say it. And it's understandable. Minnesota fits the profile of to a T of a 5-12 upset victim, right? Major conference team that wasn't expected to be as good as they were. Some people think they might still be a little bit overseeded. This happens every year. That team loses this game every single time, and you've got to think it's going to happen here again. I really like, and it's not just because I really like Kevin Keats, but I like Wilmington, and I know they're another really trendy pick. But I talked to him, it's been a couple weeks ago, for a story, and the most interesting part of the conversation, I thought, was when he was talking about the game that they played against Duke last year. And he didn't want to come out and say, it's going to help us when we get to the tournament this year because they hadn't played in the Colonial Tournament yet. But he said, when I went into the locker room and we addressed the team and we had this whole, end of the season spiel, for a lot of teams from the state of North Carolina who just had played Duke toe-to-toe and who had never been to the tournament before, it would have been we're so proud of you, we're so great, and everybody would have been holding their heads high. He said, my guys were pissed. He said, and I was kind of pissed at them. And there was no, you guys have so much to be proud of. It was all, we should have won this game. And I think that kind of stood out to me. They have spent this entire season thinking they're going to win at least one game in the tournament, probably two. That's their whole mentality, and they're good enough to do it. I think that they've got C.J. Bryce and Chris Fleming. Those guys can light it up from the outside against Virginia. UVA will take away their transition points, which is fine, but UVA is also really struggling. And, Chris Kaycock's probably going to be the best post player in that game, which is saying something. No disrespect to Jack Salt. Love Jack Salt. But I think Wilmington's just a better overall team right now than Virginia. And I like them to win that game. And whoever wins the Florida ETSU game, I've got Florida, but I see why that's a trendy upset pick too. But I think Wilmington's going to go to the Sweet 16, so I like them a lot. And I also like Winthrop because Keon Johnson has just that star quality. He could be the new March Madness star that the casual sports fan who doesn't watch college basketball could be talking about on Monday morning. I can see him dropping like 35 in that game.
Yeah, Devontae Caycock, fun fact about him from UNC-Wilmington, leading the country in true shooting percentage at 75.8%, which is just an obscene number, especially for a guy that's 6'7".
Did I call him Chris, by the way?
Well, Chris Fleming's Devontae Caycock. I mean, they're both like 6'5", 6'6" dudes that are.
I completely butchered that. Yeah,
He's
shooting 80% from the field, and he's taken like 224 shots, which is just remarkable to me. And he's the defensive player of the year in that conference. I think that's a really good story.
Yeah, no, it's a really, really cool thing. And, Virginia here, like you said, they're struggling. I mean, they can't, score whenever things get tough. Like, this UNC-Wilmington team is athletic. They're going to get after you defensively. Typical, Patino, Kevin Keatts kind of team. They're just tough, and they're going to make life hell for guys like Kyle Guy and Ty Jerome that haven't really dealt with this before. Marial Shayok and Isaiah Wilkins, not necessarily the best ball handlers. That's not an easy matchup for Virginia at all.
Yeah, and the other thing is that in recent weeks, Tony Bennett has kind of just had to swallow his pride and say, we got to let Kyle Guy rip. Because he hasn't wanted to play him all year because he's such a defensive liability. But I guess it was when they only scored 48 points against Miami in overtime. That was kind of like the wake-up call. As good on defense as we can be, we're not going to beat dudes scoring 50 points a game. We've got to get some production from somebody besides London Parentes. And since then, he's kind of just let Kyle Guy go out there and do his thing, which is fine. Except against Wilmington, they can really, really hurt you if you've got a defensive liability, especially in the backcourt, which is sort of what Guy is. So, I think it's a pretty good matchup. I did like the fact that apparently Kevin Keatts called Rick Pitino last night and was like, "Can you help me with Virginia?" And Pitino was like, "You're asking the wrong guy." He's like, "Call Mike Bray. I got nothing for you. You don't want to pick my brain on this one."
Yeah, really. That's just one of the weirder things of college basketball in the last 3 or 4 years, that Louisville just cannot beat Virginia. You mentioned Winthrop too. Keon Johnson, I think that's a really good matchup for him against Butler, because Butler has a freshman in Kamar Baldwin who I think Johnson might be able to just kind of beat. I know that Kamar Baldwin's actually been really good defensively for them, but I'm going to take the senior over the freshman basically any time whenever it comes to March, unless we're talking elite level players like Jason Tatum. And then Butler's other option on him is basically Tyler Lewis or Keithan Savage. I'm going to take that chance and take Keon Johnson, take Xavier Cooks, and see what happens with Winthrop. I agree. Pat Kelsey is a guy who's going to get high major job offers this summer. Same with Kevin Keatts. I want guys who are known as elite coaches throughout the industry and have very high-level kids, and both Winthrop and UNC-Wilmington have both of those aspects.
No question. And when you've got two guys that good and one of them 6'8", like Xavier Cooks is, it's a really difficult match for a team like Butler, which has really good players, but not necessarily. They're not like the power conference team that's built to defend a guy who's 6'8", 185, and can knock down shots from basically anywhere on the court. No disrespect to Keelan Martin, shout out to Ballard High School, who's fantastic. He's still sort of a tweener deal. He's become a really good tweener.
Yeah.
And also, Butler's just been so enigmatic. This is a team that I think you could see losing this game easily, and you could also see them just sort of skating a little bit, barely squeaking it out, and then making a big run to a regional final or something. I just don't know what to think about them, and I tend to not trust those teams, especially coming off the way that they played against Xavier, which was just atrocious. But I'm with you. I really like Winthrop. Anybody else stand out to you in that bracket?
Well, hold on real quick before I get to that. I have two quick sponsors to tell you about. It's MyBookie. It's time to talk to you about the boatload of money you're going to win making bets this week at mybookie.ag. If you have not checked them out yet, this is the perfect time to get into the action. The Madness of March is here. Lay down some money and score big on college hoops. Join me and thousands of online players and start betting at mybookie.ag. Are you sick and tired of getting the runaround whenever you ask for a payout? Join MyBookie today. I would only recommend a service that's been good to me and our listeners. That's why I urge you to make your way over to MyBookie. When you win, they pay. They do it fast. They do it with no hassles. You're wasting your time betting anywhere else, and they even have in-game live betting so that you can place a bet after tip-off. If you join now, MyBookie will match your first deposit with a 50% bonus. That is right. If you join with $100, you're basically going to get an extra $50 for free to play with. Use the promo code THEORY, THEORY, to activate the offer. Visit MyBookie today or call 844-900-BETS, BETS. Play, win, and get paid. This podcast is also sponsored by SeatGeek. The NCAA tournament is about to get into full swing. SeatGeek is the smartest, easiest way to get tickets to your favorite team's games. With SeatGeek's seamless mobile experience, you can buy and sell tickets in just 2 taps. SeatGeek helps you find the best seats at the best prices, fully guaranteed. There is nothing like being in the stadium for the biggest plays of the year. Like I talked about earlier with that Chris Jenkins shot, it is the best experience I've ever had in my life. SeatGeek's going to get you closer to the action for a great value. I have the SeatGeek app on my phone, and it is by far the easiest way I have found to shop for tickets. I can be anywhere, and with just a few taps, I can instantly find seats. I actually just used SeatGeek like a few weeks ago to buy hockey tickets, and it is so easy to use. Best of all, my listeners get a $20 rebate off of their first SeatGeek purchase. To order your $20 rebate on tickets, download the SeatGeek app, go to the settings tab, and click add a promo code. Enter the promo code GAMETHEORY, GAMETHEORY, no space in between those words. SeatGeek will send you $20 after you have made your first ticket purchase. Again, that is download the SeatGeek app, enter the promo code GAMETHEORY today. Mike, you mentioned if I had anyone that I liked in terms of a lower seeded team, it kind of stinks because I was so high on Nevada throughout the whole year. You look at just what that team can bring. They have a very real NBA prospect in Cameron Oliver. They have a guard who can really shoot it in Marcus Marshall, and they have one of the more underrated players in Jordan Caroline around the country. He's a tough guy, physical athlete that a lot of people don't really know about yet. And I really wanted to be able to pick them in a 12-5 game, but they got matched up against Iowa State, and Iowa State is about as hot as any team in college basketball right now.
I feel like everybody, well, I don't know about everybody. I can't speak for everybody, but I always have one team that I'm like, I'm definitely going to pick them. I'm definitely going to pick them. Yep. They're going to be like in that 11-12 range, and then they get matched up with somebody else who I just love, and I just can't do it, and it's so frustrating. And I'm right there with you. I mean, Cam Oliver is so fun, and this might be the most entertaining game of the first round. Yep. I think I said that earlier today in my post, but you've got tremendous guards. You've got tremendous athletes. I mean, Cam Oliver and Deonte Burton have 2 of the best dunks, if not the 2 best dunks of the entire season.
Yep.
I'm right there with you. And in the end, I had to pick Iowa State too. I hated doing it. And I think Nevada still could win. Like, I wouldn't be shocked at all if they did, but I had to roll with Iowa State. I'm with you. I love the Wolfpack. I just wish they were playing somebody else. I might take them over any other 5 in the bracket.
Yeah, and I think that's where it comes down to as well. Like, Iowa State, I think, should be the 4 in that region, and Purdue should be the 5. I think they had a better season than Purdue did. And if they were playing Purdue, I would absolutely take Nevada over Purdue.
Yeah.
Like, I would not even think twice about it.
I'm with you. Yeah, I'm with you completely.
We'd be remiss if we didn't talk about Middle Tennessee as well, which is the team that is on top of everyone's mind, I guess, because of that seemingly easy matchup against Minnesota. Like I said, this game's a pick'em right now, according to Vegas, and that's just kind of hilarious that a 12-5 game is a pick'em. I think that it's worth pointing out here that this Middle Tennessee State team is undeniably better than last season's Middle Tennessee State team. Still have Reggie Upshaw, still have Giddy Potts, the name that Seth Davis loves to say. But the big thing here is that they added Ja'Cory Williams, who is a high major transfer, who was actually really good at Arkansas and then got kicked off the team, I believe for like some sort of burglary charge, if I remember correctly. And he came in and won the Conference USA Player of the Year award. So basically, Middle Tennessee State kept their 2 best players from last year and added the league's best player this year. Like, that is going to be a tough out for basically anyone in this entire tournament.
Yeah, and I was glad that Ja'Cory Williams actually got named the USA Player of the Year, because I didn't think they were going to do it, because there were so many people in that conference that were upset that he, did what he did at Arkansas. And it's weird, because he was such a perennial underachiever at Arkansas, and then he got into trouble, and then he lands in Murfreesboro, And you're thinking, it's great to have a guy with this much talent, but if he hasn't figured it out in 3 years, then you can forgive all of his personal flaws or background or whatever. He's still not going to get it done for you on the court. And he's been such a revelation for them. I mean, he's been the best player in that conference. So to see him actually get that award, I was pleasantly surprised that the media or the coaches or whoever votes for that sort of thing did the right thing and gave it to him. But you're exactly right about Middle being, I mean, they are vastly superior to what they were a year ago. We talked about Vandy getting into the field comfortably as a 9. They beat them by 23 early in the season. They beat Belmont. They beat they won at Ole Miss. They've beaten good teams, and their losses have been pretty good too. Like, they've been close. Like, they lost to teams that they shouldn't have lost to, but they never got blown out by anybody. At UTEP, at VCU, and then I think they had a couple of clunker losses, but they weren't terrible, if I'm remembering correctly. But you're exactly right. I mean, they've got – that was the weirdest thing, and I don't know how you feel about this, but the Michigan State game last year, the weirdest thing outside of the mere fact that Michigan State looked so bulletproof in a situation like that was the fact that Middle looked like the better team. Scoring was easier for them. Usually that game plays out in, like, they've come out red hot. They're taking advantage of a 2 seed that maybe is looking a little bit ahead. And then at the end of the game, finally dominant, like, orders restored, and the other team's scoring at will, and they're scoring easily. And then the scrappy team kind of gets a couple breaks, maybe an offensive rebound or a crazy 30-footer goes in. That was never, like, Middle Tennessee State just looked better for 40 minutes. And that was shocking to me to watch, considering how, we all thought Michigan State was. I mean, it's Izzo in March, and Middle beat them doing the types of things that Michigan State typically doesn't allow any opponent to do, let alone a 15 seed from CUSA. It was stunning to me. And you're right. This team is much better than that one.
Yeah, like, this team is going to come in fearless. And it's funny that we talk about, like, how, they blew the absolute doors off of Vanderbilt, and Vanderbilt ends up being a 9 seed, and somehow this is a 12 seed. But I would much rather have Middle Tennessee's draw than Vanderbilt's draw. So, like, the committee actually kind of took care of Middle Tennessee State a little bit here by putting them where they did. I mean, now they have a Minnesota team that's eminently beatable, and we just talked about Winthrop potentially beating Butler. That's the 4-13 game in their region. So, like, I don't know. Like, I think that this could easily be a Sweet 16 situation for Middle Tennessee.
No, I actually have them there, and I think that's going to happen. I would actually be – it's weird. I would actually be more surprised, I think, if Middle lost in the first round than I would be if they didn't make it if they made it to the Sweet 16, I should say. And then against Carolina, I mean, like you said, this is a team that all season long hasn't played like, we're building up. Hopefully we can get hot in our conference tournament and then go dancing. They've played like a team that accomplished something great the year before and now wants to do more. And I could see them sort of having was it Ohio in 2012 that played Carolina into overtime in such a shocking game? I can see them giving UNC more of a scare than anybody gives them credit for in that first game of the second weekend. That wouldn't surprise me at all.
Yeah, it wouldn't be crazy to me either. East Tennessee State's another team that people are really excited about. Steve Forbes is a former assistant at Tennessee, former assistant at Wichita, kind of took the fall for the Bruce Pearl investigation a little bit, then went the JUCO route, then Wichita State. Now is the head man at East Tennessee, and he took this team in 2 years and essentially totally remade it with transfers, and they're in the NCAA tournament. He is a phenomenal recruiter, phenomenal head coach, and he has some dudes here that are athletic, they are big, and they can really get after you, especially TJ Cromer, who is a 6'3" guard who's shooting 41% from three. He can really do a lot and really, potentially lead East Tennessee State to a surprising upset over Florida, I think.
No, I know. I get why a lot of people love this upset too, and you're right about Steve Forbes. It's crazy. He gets there, and they're so competitive right away just because they're so reliant on transfers. And now he's got his guys in there, and they're having even more success. I think Tevin Glass came from Wichita.
Yep.
Am I right about that? And then Hunter Mosquera Perea, who the long-time guy from IU, it feels like it's been so long since he was there, is also on that roster. And so
he's an underrated guy that's been in college forever.
Oh, he and Peter Jerkin, who, I mean, I can't get enough of saying Peter Jerkin, so I hope he stays around forever. But they've been around, and I don't even know, is Jerkin still on the team? I know he was on there at the beginning of the year, but I don't know if he wasn't doing much. But,
yeah, he plays very, very little.
Yeah, but so those guys are still hanging around somehow. But it's mostly the guys that now Forbes has recruited himself, and TJ Cromer is so good for them. Like, I wouldn't be shocked at all if they beat Florida. I've got Florida winning, and it was basically just because I felt I'd already picked too many upsets. At some point you have to kind of put a cap on it, and so I was like, I've got to draw the line somewhere, and I'm drawing it with Florida versus ETSU. But I mean, they're really, really good. I would not be shocked at all if that was another. That could be another 12-13 with Wilmington and ETSU playing in the second round, and then we talked about Winthrop potentially playing Middle Tennessee on the other side of the bracket. I mean, that it's not outside the realm of possibility that we could have 2 12 versus 13 games this year.
Yeah, I mean, that would be really fun. I always enjoy that. One other thing I want to note real quick before I get your picks and get you out of here. It seemed like last year, before we got on this podcast, I was sitting at home. I was like kind of gearing up for this tournament, and I was watching highlights from last NCAA tournament and like even the build up to the NCAA conference tournament season. It seems like we haven't had the level of just crazy, exciting, buzzer-beating finishes this year that we've had in the past, and especially last year. Does that seem right to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I was just trying to think about the best moments of championship week now after you said that, and the only one, the first thing that came to my head was the Big West semifinal when UC Davis rebounded an air ball and made a simple layup at the buzzer against Fullerton to go to the championship game. And it was like 2 a.m. on Saturday night, East Coast time. Mm-hmm. And that was all I could think of. I mean, there were some really good games. But, yeah, there hasn't been like the Buddy Hield madness last year in the Big 12 tournament or anything like that. It was just it's just sort of competitive games that ended up evening out in the last minute and just kind of ended without sort of any sort of drama. And hopefully that's setting the table for something better to come in the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, like, I'm not out here like predicting buzzer beaters are about to happen, but we have to be due for some, right? Like, we have to at least get something exciting going in this tournament, or maybe it's the idea of way too much exciting stuff happened last year, so we have to go a year without it to remember how special these things really are.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, because last year, like you said, the championship week was great. And then the tournament was not short on buzzer beaters at all. You had a freaking half court buzzer beater. It was so big that like some of the actual buzzer beaters that were legitimate and would have been the biggest shots in other years were just totally glossed over. Like, was Adam Woodbury last year? The tip in it was against Temple. I think that was last season. I can't remember if it was 2 years ago or last year, but yeah. Was that 2 years ago? Okay. Well, there was another game like that.
The Bronson Koenig shot from the corner last year to beat, what was it, Notre Dame, I think? Or no, it was Xavier's before they played Notre Dame. That was Xavier,
yeah.
Like, that shot was like maybe like the 6th or 7th best shot of the NCAA tournament last year. And it was like a fadeaway 3 from the corner to beat the buzzer and win the game for Wisconsin.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. I mean, that shot was eerily reminiscent of like the Maryland buzzer beater against UNC-Wilmington in 2003, the year after they won the championship. I mean, that was basically the same shot, and it's been sort of lost in all this. I think I was thinking of was the Cincinnati game where they had the buzzer beater and it was like a 0.1 second. It was still in the hands of the Bearcat player, and that was so frustrating for them. I mean, a lot of little stuff like that took place and has been so totally swept under the rug of all of our NCAA tournament memories because of the way that last season ended and because of the big stuff, the Northern Iowa buzzer beater and then the Northern Iowa collapse against A&M and all that just absolutely pure insanity over the first 2 weeks and then the championship game, obviously. But, you're right. I mean, that was as exciting a tournament as I can remember. I wish Louisville had been able to be a part of it. I feel partly responsible now, and it kind of makes me concerned about this year just because of it. But hopefully we're in for at least a little bit more of that this year.
All right, Mike. Before I let you get out of here, it's that question that everyone is going to ask you. Who is your pick to get to the Final Four?
Man, I've got Villanova. The Nova Duke regional final is the one that I think we all deserve. And it's so weird to me. I mean, 10 years ago when we were talking about Florida potentially repeating and they were the obvious favorite, we were talking about them as if they were some sort of behemoth. It was like one of the best college basketball teams in recent memory. Nova, a year after they win their own title, they've got the most wins of any defending champion in the history of the NCAA tournament. They're the number 1 overall seed. And it's almost like they're in the same exact boat they were a year ago when they were a 2 seed. that nobody thought could get over the hill and into the Final Four. It's bizarre to me how much they're being overlooked, and I get that it's a different team and they're not quite as good defensively, but I still feel like they're not getting enough credit. It's like we haven't learned our lesson yet. So I like them there. I think everybody's got Arizona coming out of the West, I feel like. I know some people have the Zags, but I've got Arizona. I've got Carolina. And then I swore I wasn't going to do it all year, but I picked Kansas. I don't know why. I'm going to regret it, but I've got those teams in the Final Four. And then I've got a rematch of the championship game a year ago, and I've got Nova over Carolina. I'll get cheeky, and I'll say 77-74.
Oh, that's just rude, man. You can't do that to North Carolina fans. They're just going to be up in arms, up in your Twitter mentions, just, getting PTSD from last season's remarkable final. Mike, tell the people where they can find your work.
Yeah, well, a number of places, but you can go to sbnation.com and click on the college basketball page. We have all of our stuff there. Cardchronicle.com is where I am for Louisville stuff. And then if you want to follow me on Twitter, it's pretty simple, at Card Chronicle, all one word. And really appreciate you having me on, Sam. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. This has been the Game Theory Podcast. That is Mike Rutherford over there. We are sponsored by SeatGeek and MyBookie for the rest of the week here at the Game Theory Podcast. And until next time, you can follow my work over at Sam_Vicini. We will talk soon. Bye.